First of all, let's start off by saying that bureaucratically, you need an interagency process. We have, in the intelligence community, for example, there are 18 intelligence agencies, if you will, all with a different mission, right? We're all supposed to do our mission. We all have a common goal, hopefully, but we all try to effectuate our own mission to that common goal.
Thank you for joining us at this truly historic moment as we prepare to raise the United States flag here at our embassy in Havana, symbolizing the reestablishment of diplomatic relations after 54 years.
And so the way it works, on paper at least, is that you do your job, you share the information as you go, and at some point the information and the goal is met by the sharing of information that each agency is responsible for, and it provides the ingredient for policymakers to make the right decision in terms of international policy.
It is with that healing mission in mind that I turn now to Larry Morris, Jim Tracy, and Mike East. 54 years ago, you gentlemen promised to return to Havana and hoist the flag over the United States Embassy that you lowered on that January day long ago. Today, I invite you on behalf of President Obama and the American people to fulfill that pledge by presenting the Stars and Stripes to be raised by members of our current military detachment.
That's the way it's supposed to work. At the same time, it's been my experience over decades where the bureaucratic process works well only if you have personal relationships.
I would say that national interests are influenced by the national security enterprise in that each agency within the national security enterprise has its core areas of responsibility, identifies core concerns and issues, particularly if we're thinking about U.S. national security domestically or if you're thinking about abroad.
And there's a couple of interesting terms in there that are difficult to define, because we look at interagency. What does that mean? Is it an entity? Is it a process? And the bottom line is it's really a process of bringing all the agencies of the United States government together that are in the national security enterprise to make national security policy.
You can take a narrow or a broad view of this, but the national security enterprise is essentially those agencies and bodies that have stakes in U.S. national security. So if you think about two of the key agencies involved in the national security enterprise, it'd be the State Department and the Department of Defense. Again, if you get more broad, you can even find that there are non-U.S. governmental entities that influence the U.S. national security enterprise. So if you think about international organizations that may be implementers of U.S.-funded programs that are intended to improve our national security or address our national interest abroad.
These efforts not only help the United States live our values around the world, but they help to advance our collective security, health, and prosperity. On behalf of all of us here at USAID, thank you for supporting our mission to extend the reach of human dignity across the planet.
What the whole process is designed to do is to get to decision by the president, support the president's ability to make decisions on national security.
So the National Security Council's core role is to advise the president, but also to serve as an integrator, if you will, a coordinator of national security, foreign policy, and to a significant degree also military policy among the interagency.
The National Security Council is responsible for the U.S. government interagency formulation of the national security strategy of the United States that every president to this date, since the formulation of the National Security Council after World War II, has been responsible for issuing when he was president, at least once during his presidency. And he must sign it in ink.
I think particularly for Army officers that are mid-career and above, and those who may end up with an opportunity to serve at a U.S. embassy or on a detail to some part of the interagency, and may end up actually being a drafter, of an annotated agenda for their leadership to attend National Security Council meetings. I think it's critical for them to understand the process, the key players, and just how they can influence policy.
The best way for policy options to come up through the system to the president is through the process that we call the interagency.
Decades ago, I think it was easier to say, this is an issue for the Defense Department, this is an issue for the Treasury, this is for an issue for the State Department. There is a notion now that there are many players that are required to deal and solve a problem, and they need to be all pulling in the same direction. And that, of course, is the coordination function that's at the essence of what's called the interagency process.
The students that come to CGSC, 100% of them are going to be impacted by the interagency process. 1% of them may work in the interagency, but the training, the awareness, the familiarization that's required to understand what the process is, how it works, how the National Security Council works, how those decisions flow downhill to the tactical level. Those are all things I think that officers, as they matriculate, leaders, as they matriculate up the ranks at different levels of organization, specifically to operational and strategic, they need to know how the interagency process works.
When it comes to National Security Council meetings, the leading influences in those meetings really depends on the issue being addressed.
If we look at this whole cooperation piece and what might interfere with things going well and everyone playing nicely together, when we go into a particular issue, different agencies will have different equities in a particular issue. And equities, it's a nice term that gets thrown around, but it does have a lot of meaning. It's one that has to be understood as we look at the process. So what are equities? Equities could be anything from an issue is in the particular purview of an entity. Like if a policy may involve the use of military force, so there's interests are one form of equity. Their form of equity gets down to is resources. A particular policy may enhance an agency's resources, and a particular policy may detract from an agency's resources. It's those potential competition and equities that could interfere in cooperation.
As I look back on what I had to learn about how, for lack of a better term, the national security enterprise operates and how to work within that enterprise. Some people call it the national security establishment. Whatever you call it, the interagency, it doesn't really matter. This thing that makes the national security related decisions in this town. I think the single most important thing that I had to realize was that this establishment, as complex it is, it has several dozen U.S. government agencies of various types in it. The least effective way to see this enterprise is as a government. The most effective way to view this enterprise is as a complex tribal society. Now, that may sound outrageous. That may sound wrong, but let me tell you why I came to believe that. And the reason I call them tribal chiefs is because they exert enormous amounts of personal and professional energy every day in protecting the interests of their tribe. Now, I don't actually mean that as a criticism. That's much of their job, is to advance the interests of the agency or department that they're responsible for. But it's an iron reality also. And there are times when the interests of a specific organization might be in conflict with what the nation actually requires.
I mean, we have our own branch culture in the military, infantry versus armor, air defenders versus field artillery. I mean, each branch kind of comes with its own parochial culture or interests. And it's the same at, each level of government. You have institutions that, if you can break down those cultural barriers and allow folks to work through problem sets together, they get past the cultural challenges, and they form personal relationships, and they begin to understand and communicate more clearly, come up with more inventive solutions that take advantage of all the elements of national power, not just the military.
So the U.S. Institute of Peace was founded and created by Congress in 1984, and with the purpose to prevent, mitigate, and resolve conflict around the world. So that's the key mission given to us by the United States Congress. So the way we do that, we work with countries, partners, organizations in countries to help them, support them to address conflicts before they become, before they escalate, so that we are not dragged into those conflicts.
So the National Security Council's policy is only as good as its execution overseas, in the field, in the countries with whom we have relations. And who's responsible for executing the national security policy of the President of the United States? It's the U.S. Embassy in that country. And who leads the U.S. Embassy in that country? It's called the country team. It's the personification of the U.S. government interagency from headquarters shifted out to the field in every embassy around the world.
At the embassy level, the interagency process tends to work very smoothly because everything is under the control of the ambassador. At the Washington level, it does not work very smoothly, often, if at all, because there are so many centers who are responsible for various aspects of any kind of an event or a process. So the coordination effort in Washington often takes the majority of time and energy involved in trying to address something that at the embassy level could be done with one very short meeting amongst all of the people involved.
One thing that's true of all embassies around the world is they are led by an ambassador or chief of mission. This person is a presidential appointee. They're nominated by the president. They serve as the president's representative overseas. They do have to be confirmed by the Senate.
I think some of the challenges that military planners may face when they go into an environment where they're working with an ambassador at an embassy in a third world country or in a more expeditionary environment, it may be their first time really coming to grips with or confronting some of the dynamics of civil-military relations. An ambassador has a signed piece of paper by the President of the United States stating that they're the senior representative for the President, for the nation in that country. Yet, the ambassador may not have any resources to execute that mission and is really dependent on the military. If a young officer goes into an embassy thinking that they're the ones that have the plan, they'll often run up against the wall when they understand or come to understand that it's the ambassador that's in charge.
The most important thing for an officer who's arriving from out of country with a particular assignment to execute in that ambassador's AOR is to recognize that as important as your mission is, the ambassador has to take that mission into account in the whole panoply of responsibilities that that ambassador has.
U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey Flake, U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, visited Incirlik Air Base to discuss the recent earthquakes that struck central southern Turkey on February 6 and see the humanitarian support efforts firsthand. During his visit, Ambassador Flake delivered the following message.
The American people have been deeply affected by what is happening here in Turkey. We're working in lockstep with our Turkish counterparts to make sure that we deliver for the people of Turkey.
So, as would be true in any situation in life, whether you're going to a PTA meeting or whether you're going in to talk to an ambassador, make sure that you're sensitive to the challenges that that ambassador faces. Now, the message on that is do your homework. Figure out who that person is, because you're only going to get one shot to make a first impression. And it's not your operation, it's whether the ambassador trusts you. Second, remember that an ambassador will get no credit for your success. God willing, your success will probably never be noticed, depending upon the kind of op you're going to pitch. But he'll get all the blame if it goes wrong in the press with the head of government where he's working.
But how do you respond to those Malian critics who thinks that the U.S. is not doing enough to help them fight against extremism?
So I think I'm going to go back to what I said to you earlier. The perception of a U.S. not helping it feels kind of strange to me. We've been here for 62 plus years, and we have invested in all sectors in Mali. So I don't know why that perception is there, but believe me, everything that we do is for the Malian people. And I think we want to make sure that there are various parts of what we bring to the table. They may not directly be security related, but they help and advance security.
I think, again, once you reach the mid-level, whether you're a foreign service officer or a military officer, understanding how the interagency works, understanding the different cultures and the different agencies and how to integrate with them, how to make sure that your equities, your agency's equities, are understood by your counterparts in other agencies who may not have military experience. I think that's critical.
One of the key takeaways that our students should get from the course, and I think we do a good job in providing it, is the importance of relationships. And not so much at the very highest level between cabinet secretaries. That's echelons above where our graduates are going to work within the policy process. But it's the important personal relationships at the lower levels, at the working level. Because when our students go wherever it's going to be, and in my experience, first of all, it was going to a combatant command. For others, it may be going straight to the Joint Staff or to the Office of Secretary of Defense or a service headquarters. When it comes to policy formulation and a cooperative interagency process, it's important to know who are my counterparts in other agencies. You know, who's working at my level in the State Department on a particular issue, who's working at my level in the intelligence community on a particular issue, so that through those relationships, a lot of policy issues can be worked out at the lowest level, and that's kind of the goal of the process.
Our team at the U.S. Embassy in Ljubljana is made up of Slovenians and Americans working hand in hand to make lives better in both of our countries and promote the democratic values we believe in to others across the globe. We make sure our militaries can continue to train side by side so that together we can defend ourselves and our allies, but also make the world a safer and more secure place, now and for future generations. To make our countries more prosperous and improve the quality of life for all of us, we constantly seek new ways to expand trade between the United States and Slovenia, make sure American companies doing business here have the chance to make a positive impact on the economy and communities where they work, and help local companies break into the vast U.S. market. But most of all, we build relationships, one person at a time, by bringing our people together to study, research, innovate, and explore their shared passion. For music, for movies, for dance, for food, for space, for fun. So we at the U.S. Embassy are proud to dedicate ourselves every day to everything we have in common, our shared heritage, today's partnerships, and tomorrow's opportunities.
The sooner everyone understands the rules of the game and the roles of every player.
Today we are here in person to tell you that we are committed to upholding the highest standards of integrity and accountability, inclusivity, and diplomacy. On the global stage, as a partner and a leader, this is the foundation on which we stand.
And the sooner there's some appreciation, respect, and trust and cross-training between one another, each of us whom represents the U.S. government department or the agency that sent us there in the first place.
That in everything we do, the first question we have to ask ourselves is this: how is it going to benefit our fellow Americans? How will this policy, how will this initiative, how will this outreach answer their needs, their values? How will it make their lives just a little bit better? That's the first question we have to ask. And we're going to hold ourselves to that standard every step of the way.
The better we will play together out there in the field, and the better for the American people in our execution of that foreign policy.
And I've said many times over the years, those of you who are stationed overseas and have been stationed overseas, you're America's face. You're what people see in the country you are. They look at you. You are the face of America. And it matters a great deal how you comport yourself and how you deal with the folks that you're dealing with in that particular country.
That state officers also have to understand military cultures. One of the things I would do differently, if I had my career over again, is I would have applied to be a foreign policy advisor in the military, to understand better military culture and how the military approaches issues. I think it would have greatly enhanced my ability to operate as a state officer if I understood military culture better. I did not serve in the military, so I don't bring that background with me. But to do a tour as a POLAD, I think I would advise officers, certainly in state, to do. And I'd also advise military officers to try to work at state for a year or two and to understand, again, that state culture.
So those prejudices are out there. So what can Army officers do to overcome those prejudices? A good bit of it is play to your strength. Play to your strength. If you're an Army officer, you're highly educated. We have more professional military education. We have more professional education than probably any other department of the government does. You're highly educated. You're very competent in what you do. And you're very skilled in a process, whether it be the military decision-making process, the joint planning process. You know process, you know how to plan. So play to your strengths, but be humble and acknowledge those other agencies, they've got some pretty good talents as well.
Yeah, the cultural differences between foreign service and military, wow. They are huge, and it's difficult to articulate it, but I would say, and this is not at all a criticism at either side, but military tend to be extremely focused within a narrower range, so it's much more vertical, whereas foreign service people tend to be a lot more horizontal and seem to be a little bit more sensitive as to how the various different components all play together. It's very telling, for example, if you have a meeting and the meeting is going to be at 5 p.m., i.e. 1700 hours, the military folks will all be there at 1645. The foreign service people may start showing up at 1700 hours.
One of the things I found interesting when I was deployed is that necessity is the mother of invention. And what I mean by that is when you're on the forward edge of a challenge, you find it's much more easy to work together towards a common goal or a common objective. And all the institutional walls or cultural differences all fall to the bottom because everybody's trying to solve a problem that's immediate and it's right in front of your face.
You know that in terms of interviews and listening and working, I think the day when you haven't learned something new is a day really wasted. And the fault is not them, it's you. Because there is always something new out there to pick up on, to cogitate about, to roll around in your mind about how and in what way is this going to be useful? How does this add something over here? And you develop over the years a capacity to cubbyhole so that as you're talking and when you're presenting, you have a pretty good idea of what to shy away from when you don't want to be revelatory. But you also have a pretty good idea of when you need to break through the barriers by saying, here I think there is truth, and let me tell you what it is. This problem cannot be solved as long as we both stick in this particular channel and don't move out of it. And our challenge is, how do we move out of the channel? And here are 3 opportunities that we ought to consider to move in that direction. And that's when the diplomacy begins to open the door to the process that gets you to the solution, rather than merely stultifies the conversation by endless repetition of non-movement.
And that's a critical part, is understanding that. Because if you're going to work cooperatively, if you're going to try to at sometimes win over someone from a different agency, either win them over to your position, help them understand your position, you have to understand your culture.
Managing cultural differences is challenging, but it's very, very doable. And I'll tell you why. It's like in our field in diplomacy, you study the culture and the language of whatever country you're going to. And that would be the same between the military and the diplomat, is that if you understand each other's culture, then there's that Venn diagram that encompasses both of your worldviews, and it can be very, very effective. So that, the diplomat engaging with the military officer will say something, the diplomat will say in their mind, so what is really being said, and vice versa, and what goal are we going towards? So yes, it can be challenging, but it is extremely, extremely doable.
I, for my own help, divide listening into 3 layers. The top, always the most important, is you want to be sure you hear exactly what they say and the words they use. Where are their ambiguities? Where are their open doors? Where are their hints about change? Where are they deeply stuck? Where in that panoply of listening ideas is there some possible area where things may move? The second is really quite interesting. It's to plumb the depths of what they may really mean.
Mr. General Secretary. And I think that I know his views on the entire subject matter that poses. Mr. General Secretary, do you think women are interested in throw weights and missiles and the other topics of this summit?
Sometimes they're using government perfected phrases, standard jargon, standard presentational language. But they haven't yet fully explored what it actually means and where it can take the next conversation. And that's your job, because listening also involves questioning. And so a further opening at layer 2 of what people really mean when they say something is important. And I would wager a bet that neither you in representing the United States or they in representing their own government have fully explored all the depths of the nuances of the meaning that will have to be taken into account to find an answer.
My view is that both men and women in the United States and the Soviet Union, all over the world, are interested in having peace for themselves and being sure that this peace would be kept stable and lasting for the future. And for that, they are interested in the reduction of the numbers of weapons we have, and they are interested in having these reductions. Therefore, these matters are in the center of my discussions with the President these days.
The third is the most closely guarded secret of all. So well guarded that it is never decided by most governments until the final point of the end game. That's what will they settle for. The governments protect their secrets, not, as Winston Churchill said, by a bodyguard of lies, but by a bodyguard of non-decision. And it is an interesting point that in diplomacy, as you go through, that means you can affect outcome, because a non-decision is a vulnerability. It opens you up to listening to how the other side might present something that will end up to be a win-win or a mutual interest, without having you deeply dug in to something that won't work, but is there because you are staked out with that particular approach from your national capital. It is also interesting, a final point in all of this. Most American negotiators would agree with me, I think, when I would tell you that in any negotiations, over 60% of your problems are with Washington, not with the other side.
Building personal relationships and leveraging and utilizing those personal relationships is extremely important. Whether you're talking about, a representative of the military that's, working within the interagency or at an embassy overseas, or if you're talking about a foreign service officer that's assigned to, as a political advisor, for example, to one of the combatant commands or whatever. It's critical to reach out. If you have information, for example, that you think might be useful for your colleague to know, maybe there's an upcoming exercise or event that they might be able to plug into or even inform in some way, or gain something just by observing. Reaching out to those individuals, letting them know what's upcoming, and inviting them to participate is fantastic, and usually it results in reciprocation. So extremely important to build those relationships.
The U.S. Embassy evacuated, and we had to send everybody home except me. That was specifically the order of the ambassador, and his prerogative was to try to get as many people out of the country as he could. I was fortunate that he saw value in asking me to stay. Otherwise, there would have been no DAO after the actual embassy evacuation. And really, the fact that I was able to stay on HKIA gave the DAS a foothold to evacuate the people that we had an interest in, our partners, who for many years who've worked closely with us. Many of them would have been overlooked in the evacuation if somebody hadn't been there to advocate for them.
And the more you build your personal relationships, the more you create confidence, the more you both believe on both sides of an issue that I'm going to do my best to give you the truth, and I'm going to do my best that if I say we're committed to do something, we will do it. And I will try to avoid lying, even if I should, in making the best presentation of my point of view, slightly embellish the verbiage of getting there. You always have that right, but you do not have the right of asserting absolute falsehoods without being caught and being required to pay for it, if not directly, indirectly, in a lack of trust. And a lack of trust is a surefire formula for stasis, not for progress.
I think sometimes there is the pitfall of feeling like because I'm on a detail to another agency, unless representatives of that agency reaches out to me to ask for assistance, that I don't really need to do anything other than just kind of be present. That's not what you want to do. You want to be engaged, you want to work the halls, you want to meet individuals within the agency that have, even if it's just tangential, interest or stake in what your service branch, what your agency is doing, and share information. And as I said earlier, it will usually be reciprocated, and you'll have a much more fruitful experience because of it, and the interagency will be an improved interagency because of it.
And so you learn in diplomacy to manage your words in a way that is least designed to get the backup of somebody else. And when you do that, you get what I would call a hard memory bounce in your hippocampus to make sure that in the future, when you get to that particular problem, you have developed a way of expressing it without engendering the negative reaction, which tends to sour a problem and a relationship. And those are all part, I think, of being able to run an effective operation. I think where you can agree with the other side, you should go out of your way to make that clear. That can be built upon and expanded. It's a foundation stone for a solution arch, if I can put it that way, that shouldn't be ignored.
And when it all comes together, it's not going to be everybody gets everything they want. Because it's not going to be the Department of Defense's policy. It's not going to be the State Department's policy. It's not going to be the intelligence community's policy. It's going to be the policy of the United States in support of the president's definition of our national interest. So I think that's the key piece. They take that away, and the fact that it has to be a cooperative process in which you understand the people involved, you understand their culture, and you can all communicate with each other.
So if you're the military, if you're the hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And that, I know that's something that we hear all too often. If you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. When you involve yourself in interagency programs and exercises like the Peace Game, what you understand is that not every problem is a nail. And not every tool that needs to be used to solve that problem is going to be the hammer. How do we bring all the elements of national power together to solve wicked problems, complex problems, using all the elements of national power, not just the military? How do we take advantage of all of our resources? When we think of diplomacy and we think of the military, how do we use commerce? How do we use agriculture? How do we use all the different things that the U.S. can bring to bear from all of our different institutions to create stronger partnerships, to create better alliances, to help folks work through their problems, whether it's humanitarian assistance or natural disasters? There's so much that the U.S. government can bring to bear, and it's not just through the military and the military's resources. Events like the Peace Game help folks understand all the resources that are available. They build relationships. They break down institutional cultural barriers, and it starts with simple conversations that get ignited through the events or challenges they'll face in an event like the Peace Game.
The importance of the Peace Game, it captures in a concentrated bit of time some of the situations that our embassies, especially in the developing world, can actually be, facing.
The Peace Game offers a dynamic that brings together the interagency. It's joint, it's interagency, it's intergovernmental, it's multinational. It's hosted at the U.S. Institute for Peace in Washington, D.C.
I consider the Peace Games to be a tremendous investment in demonstrating how cooperation works in an embassy and affects the results of policymakers and decision makers, and it gives the participants in the Peace Game the opportunity to deal and to learn how to deal with crises. There's never too much training that you can do for people going overseas and working in an environment that is different than the U.S. and crises happen. And there's no such thing as too much training. And I find the Peace Games to be the kind of outlet and mechanism necessary to best prepare our future diplomats.
An opportunity like the Peace Game, if scaled up, brings all these people together in a simulated environment so that they begin to see where are the gaps, where are points of frictions, and try to find ways to correct those, right? So that's the value of simulation or initiatives such as the Peace Game.
within the last 3 decades, there has been a tendency, in my humble view, to over-militarize the answer to national security and foreign policy problems, with the failure to understand the need for an exit strategy. And with respect to diplomacy, there has been too much of a willingness to fold in with the military exercise as the primary opportunity rather than the ultimate opportunity. So it is, in that sense, something that we need to come closer together on. And we need to be sitting together more often to make that happen.
You would think that in a world like the one we're living in, where you can communicate with anybody in the world at literally a flick of a mouse, or some other picking up a cell phone, that you wouldn't need a lot of face-to-face meetings. But in fact, I think that it's not only as important as it always was in the era before instantaneous communication, but to some extent even more so. So that people can look each other in the eye, they can watch the body language, and they can work together to get to the resolution of whatever the issue is. So these cabinet meetings give everybody a chance to do that.
At the same time, it's been my experience over decades where the bureaucratic process works well only if you have personal relationships. And that's what you find in the peace games. That's what you find in embassies. That's where you find every place in the world where agencies coexist and work together. Okay? It's the personal relationships that really make a difference. It's me calling you or me calling my friend and say, hey, we really need to do this. And when that happens, the interagency process works its best.
Yeah, I mean, I think the SFAB piece of this, how incredible would it be if a young major who's reporting for the first time to a security force assistance unit at the battalion or brigade level, or maybe at the command level, and they've participated, or they know they're going to get to participate in a peace game type event, and get the experience before they forward deploy of working with an embassy country team, of communicating with an actual ambassador. These aren't role players. These are representatives, just like they are, from their institution. These are CIA folks, these are USAID representatives, these are diplomats with years of experience working in embassy, and there are ambassadors playing the role of ambassador, helping them work through these challenges. If they go into their unit having had an experience like the peace game, they'll be miles ahead of their peers.
In many ways, as I said earlier, there's a bureaucratic process. But again, it's the emphasis on the personal relationships. Know when you can talk, know when you can share information, know your colleagues, and consider and keep in mind at all times that you're all looking at the same mission and you're all striving to achieve the same goal. And nobody's your enemy. Nobody's your enemy. Harmony and cooperation make for an efficient and effective embassy. So when you're out there for the first time, you learn your counterpart. You learn about what you can say and take the opportunities to share information and to be candid. Candor and information sharing is incredibly important. Keeping in mind that the mission is the most important thing, and the way to do that oftentimes is not by yourself, but by sharing with everyone else in your embassy or in your station.
So that was, I think, part of what is always gratifying when you get involved in something that can be extremely important.
What brings us together is that we have common interests which transcend those differences.
At the end of the trip, diplomatic ground was broken with the Shanghai Communique. After covering the points on which both sides had reached agreement, they proceeded to detail their different positions on all the other outstanding issues. Nixon referred to this in his final toast to Shanghai on the eve of his departure.
That communique will make headlines around the world now. But what we have said in that communique is not nearly as important as what we will do in the years ahead.
One of the things you learn very quickly in the State Department is that no one individual is responsible for any policy change. Victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat a single victim. So watch out. You may be the victim.
So at the beginning, I said maybe 1% of Army officers may ever work in the interagency, but 100% of Army officers will be impacted by the interagency process, by the decisions that flow out of it, by participating in events, whether it's like the peace game or other training events that offer those same sorts of opportunities. We're actually getting after those lessons that we identified over a decade ago, which is that future conflicts are going to be an interagency fight. They're going to be a joint interagency fight. They're going to be a joint interagency intergovernmental fight. They're going to be a joint interagency intergovernmental multinational fight. If we're not interoperable, if we're not sharing information, if we're unable to coordinate, or we're faced with the challenges of institutional cultural barriers, and we haven't trained through that before the next conflict happens, we're doomed to repeat some of those mistakes that we identified over a decade ago.
This is one of the biggest problems, that people walk out of here without their BlackBerries. So now I have to actually go find out who all these BlackBerries belong to. So, all right, so Chu has walked out without, Carol's walked out.